We're joined now by Arise analyst and lawyer, Dr. Sam Amadi. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Amadi, for coming to Newsnight. While I was going through that issue, I got confused when I saw that the issue suddenly vanished, the matter suddenly vanished in the eve of the November 11 governorship election in Imo State, when it was listed for hearing at the Supreme Court. I mean, you are a lawyer, so you're in a better position to school me and educate me on how matters vanish under mysterious circumstances in court.
The Supreme Court, for that matter.
It can only happen in Nigeria. I mean, two issues before we go to the details. This is the case, Imo was a case that the European Union flagged as one of the horrible incidents of the electoral system. A case was filed, just let's get it straight, in 2020. The former Chief Justice of Nigeria, now this is the process. When cases is filed before the Supreme Court, there's an obligation of the Supreme Court to fix the case for hearing. Here you make a decision and say off or right.
Right.
From 2020 to 2023, a Supreme Court Chief Justice then refused to assign the case. Didn't dismiss it, didn't nullify it, kept it covered up. Now the story in town is, of course, there's no explanation, no judicial rationale justifies a Supreme Court to keep a case for 3 years.
I was coming there.
No justification anywhere in the world, no ethics or norm or practice of adjudication. You have decision to make, throw it away, accept it. So it must be corruption, no doubt about that. For 3 years, corruption closed that case. When corruption or further corruption opened it up,
right?
This is criminal. And the Supreme Court needs to have a probe. In the last 2 years, the Supreme Court needs to be probed. And some people prosecuted, whether administrative staff or the justice. I mean, this is scandalous. I can tell you as a PhD from Harvard in law, as a former law teacher, there's no adjudicatory process that allows a case to be kept for 3 years, a political case challenging who has the right to govern a state. When the case opened up before election.
Not just the right to govern a state, the right to contest.
No, I mean,
exactly.
No, I know, but no, I'm saying the issue here is about the right of the people to have the right governor govern them.
Right.
That's the priority case for the Supreme Court. Everywhere in the world, the Supreme Court will prioritize that case and dismiss it clear on how to do it. Again, before election, everybody will say, well, finally, the same Supreme Court, under a new CJN, decides to kick the case forward. I mean, it's illogical to say a case is better heard after voting or before voting. Think about that. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. So these are the two issues. This Supreme Court handling of this case first, no matter the outcome we're going to get tomorrow, is bordering on criminality, crash criminality.
Okay, so
and that should be persecution and probe. It doesn't make any sense. It dehumanizes Nigeria and destroys the credibility of adjudication in this country. Nobody sitting anywhere in the world. We hear that the Supreme Court put a case for 3 years, open it up again, kick the ball again. That's crazy. You never get done anywhere in the world. Okay, guys, let's take it on.
Any adjective would actually suffice.
This is not a case for being nice. Yeah.
I mean, some are arguing this case has taken too long. Is there any need? Is it even necessary, to still open the case? I mean, since Hope Uzodinma is already governor, and is it statute barred or not?
It's not. First and foremost, I've read the brief carefully, and a great job they did. Now look at the case. Let's get it right. Supreme Court held December that APC and AAC or Action Party,
APP. Action People's Party. Yeah.
Good. Do not have candidate. Why? Because Uchemosu was double nominated. Very clear. And that is very lucid. Justice Augia argued that case. You don't have a... So because in both the case of Marafa, many cases, the Supreme Court have said that once there is clear evidence that a candidate has double nomination, that candidate, so the first they said the APC candidate is Uchenwosu, the AA candidate is Uchenwosu, High Court says so, Court of Appeal says so, Supreme Court affirmed it.
Right.
And what that means therefore is that two of them, APC and APP, have no candidate for the election. Supreme Court says so, December. January, in another case, Supreme Court says Hope Uzodinma won the lawful vote, therefore Emeka is number 2. Now these guys now came back to Supreme Court, say, we're not challenging your case in Emeka and the Hope. We're saying, sir, you have to enter consequential, because if the candidate of APC is Uchenwosu and the candidate of AA is Uchenwosu, and because of that APC and AA has no candidate for the election, which you affirmed, High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, therefore APC cannot have votes. Therefore, the vote that you've ascribed to APC is null. Therefore, Emeka, who came second? We're not challenging whether he came first or not. Having declared by yourself, you said Hope came first by a lawful vote, which Emeka came second. He should be the president. Now, this is a case that is logical, flows from the decision. The only action under section 24 of the Supreme Court Act, I think under 8 Rule 14 or thereabout, that gives the Supreme Court the power to make consequential order and says, enter consequential order. Now, the Supreme Court has the right to choose to make an error. I mean, the Supreme Court has had erroneous cases from Amadi. It's a Supreme Court. It's final, but not infallible. Right. But what pains us, who are Democrats, is why wouldn't the Supreme Court have decided this matter once and for all? Now, under our law, if, as it seemed to me clear, that the answer is that APC and AA didn't have a candidate based on Supreme Court's own judgment.
On the Uchenwosu case. Is there any difference between the Uchenwosu case and Hope Uzodinma's case?
The two cases are not linked. Uchenwosu case is about pre-qualification.
Right.
Primary. Hope case is that he got a lawful vote. But they are now saying you cannot get a lawful vote if your party had no candidate
in the first place.
So the question is, if the Supreme Court agrees, they will now say, well, now the question now is, if you did this November, before the November 11th or 5th governorship election in Imo State, okay?
11th.
It unsettles less than it will settle tomorrow if you agree with that argument. Right. So the Supreme Court had opportunity to make the decision before the vote, which is the right thing to do. See, you can dismiss it, you can agree or not, but what the Supreme Court has no right to do, and what is violation of the constitutional duty of the Supreme Court, is to decide not to hear a case for 3 years.
3 years. Okay, now.
Bring it up again, decide to kick the can. That is not a judicial action.
Okay.
The US Supreme Court will first hear in-house and say, we vacate this case, we're not going to hear it. So you wait for them to tell you we'll hear or not hear. 3 years.
Now make me understand, Dr. Amadi. What then happens if eventually the Supreme Court now says Hope Uzodinma shouldn't have been, was not qualified in the first place on the final analysis of things, that okay, he shouldn't have been governor in the first place. What then happens to the first 4 years that he already spent?
Would it be factored in, or will he be seen as having been governor or afresh? Would you discount it as the first 4 years?
Can you reverse the mandate?
No, that's an important point about how we manage electoral cases. The law is that if the Supreme Court says that he shouldn't have been governor, his mandate express is nullity. The guy who ought to be governor will have to be inserted into that space.
Well, what about all the salaries he got, all the financial
the law says that
he got, all the contracts signed?
Third parties interest. The law says anything he does as governor is covered. That means they are not going to be invalidated. So, for example, if I want contracts to do a road, he can't. But the point is,
what about benefits to himself?
Well,
as
oftentimes
governor?
you see courts say return money, but I think it's wrong. It's not justice, because it's you who kept him on that job.
Okay, let's talk about the more important thing right now. I mean, he's been sworn in once, right? And very likely he'll be sworn in again in January if the Supreme Court allows him. If the Supreme Court says Hope Uzodinma shouldn't have been governor for the past 4 years.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
It means...
Will he be sworn in again in the event that he contests again?
Well, two issues.
Right.
If the Supreme Court says he shouldn't have sworn in, the first Supreme Court says APC, APP
right.
had no candidate. Therefore, Hope Uzodinma couldn't have been candidate. Therefore, Hope Uzodinma couldn't have got those votes. Therefore, those votes are invalid. Therefore, the second person with verified Supreme Court confirmed votes, make it becomes governor. Then it means that Hope's exercise of governorship for the past 4 years is null. So, two things flow. Now, many people have argued that even if you are nullified, like with the case of Saver, for example, that you have already been sworn in once. You can't be sworn in more than twice.
Right.
That for me is a wrong argument. If the Supreme Court says you didn't win the election, it means that they have nullified backward. You are swearing, because their swearing in proceeded from being determined as the winner. So they have said you are not supposed to be. That's why people shouldn't be calling them excellency. If you were a former governor and the court, if you are impeached, your excellency, if you were invalidated the election, you're not an excellency. You never, it's as if you were not in that job. Now the key question is, what happens, assuming Hope didn't win this election, and maybe somebody won of the PDP, or maybe a Labour Party candidate win, people say, you've created some kind of, third-party interest. Okay, but the point here is, if the Supreme Court holds, then the more coherent, legally coherent thing is to write it back to January 2020, meaning right back to when he was in, put back the right guy there, invalidate everything that has happened, because everything that has happened is invalid. That's the reason why some of us have argued. In
spite of his latest victory.
Yeah, that victory is a victory predicated
on
the fact that he is, because the person who ought to be there, and that's why when governors who come in mid-term, they still do their 4 years. That's why we have the off-cycle election. The person who has a mandate has to take back his 4 years mandate, and if he takes back it will start reading from, just like Peter B came in, almost 2 or 3 years.
So they're going to pay him all the
I'm not sure the financial. That's not the issue. My concern is, how do you create coherence, logical coherence in Supreme Court decisions? I mean, and that's what pains me.
So it leaves more questions than answers for us.
This is a needless, self-inflicted error by the Supreme Court. First, why will the Supreme Court make a decision on December 20, December 2019, January 2020, they couldn't see that these decisions. Two, when the issue was brought up, why did they delay for 3 years? The former Senate Chief Justice should be probed and ask the question. 3 years. I don't care if you threw it away. But here's the discussion. But once you kept it there and then you open it after corruption, you close it after corruption, there's no other way to suggest why a case for 3 years be pending. And when it's due for hearing, when it is much more convenient before second vote, you kicked it after second vote, and you're going to hear it. It doesn't make sense. And this is the lowest we have fallen in the history of judicial in this country. I can say that objectively.
So sad. Well, we're left with more questions than answers. Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.